Good evening. The deep division of Uganda's population can no more be ignored. Following the death of UPDF General Elly Tumwine, the mixed messaging, some of which included open and brazen lack of empathy, the need for serious and focused national truth-telling dialogue and reconciliation process was evident. Uganda's socio-economic and political divide is bursting at the seams with deep-seated anger and unresolved justice matters that only a dialogue can bring. And yet, evermore, the nation looks far from it. Tonight, on the spot, we host a man of the clock, and with candour, who is not afraid to speak to the politics and soul of the nation, retired Dr. Bishop Zac Niringiye. Dr. Zac, thank you so much for having honored our invitation. A warm welcome to you.
Thank you very much, Patrick.
You know, we meet tonight when there's a lot of bitterness in Uganda. There's a mountain of hate. And almost we are facing a bottomless pit of bitterness. When people express themselves these days, you can feel the anger, you can feel the agony, you can feel the pain. And somehow it is taking an ethnic undertone. When you open the messages that we read, you may think we have a social media mujahideen. What is going on?
Thank you very much for inviting me. The context you would like to locate this.
Yes.
Is the passing of General Elly Tumwine. And I think you should also mention the passing of Honorable Yona Kanyomozi, all happening within the same 7 days. Two very important political leaders. Yes. Political leaders, not just Ugandans, but people who have wielded political power over a long time. So first of all, I like to associate myself with many, and especially for me, because General Elly Tumwine was a friend, his family, they are friends, so it's definitely a personal loss. I actually knew General Elly Tumwine as we were boys at the university. We were both in Lumumba, so I knew him in the Christian Union and so on, and we, you know, our families are friends. We used to have a Bible study many years ago together. So I'd like to take this opportunity to condole with my dear sister Jolie and the children. This is a very difficult time. I have been trying to imagine, thinking about them with everything you have described, and certainly want to express empathy and continue to pray with them, that the Lord of grace, strength in this very challenging hour. I would also like to express condolence for the passing of Elder Yona Kanyomozi, definitely a phenomenal elder within this country. For the family, again, a man that I had come to both admire and know personally, participated in family events with him. So I would like to express condolences and indeed empathy to the families. But having said that, I think it's very easy to only acknowledge the passing of leaders, political leaders. There are several other Ugandans who are dying out of all sorts of, and I really hope that there can be a moment when as a country we recognize the grief of everyone. The question you ask about the anger, the bitterness that is evident, referencing the responses, both I think some we have seen in social media, others that certainly would have been in the conversation spaces, in bars, in churches, in some harsh tones. But I think it would be a mistake to think that this is now. This is now because it's in our face. But as one who has had the privilege of experiencing this country, I still can remember as a student in Ntare School in 1971, after the coup, 1972. I had fellow students who came from a particular region, because as you remember, the post-independence army was predominantly
Luo or Acholi and Langi.
Yes, predominantly. That's not to say that there were not other, you know.
I know what you mean, but most of them were.
Ndahende Chire was there, and others, but
Zedmaruru and all this.
Predominantly. And I can tell you the grief was palpable. I can still remember as a teenager just seeing these young boys being shipped because their fathers had been massacred.
Because they belong to a certain ethnic group.
Because they, no, well, not because they belong to a certain ethnic group, but you've got to be able to say because the, I speak about the density of guns. There are regions that have high density.
Dr. Zac, I want to highlight the fact that if people have anger against the government, if people have anger against their political leaders, I can understand that. But when you ostracize, I would say the word is becoming mouthful, but when you sort of
ostracize,
when you ostracize a community, ostracize a tribe, then you are actually
give me time, Patrick, because we must, the point I'm really putting to you is that you make a mistake to just talk about it as though it's happening now only. The point I'm making to you is that as a country we had these epochs of deep anger, deep bitterness, trauma, and I could go on, however else you describe it.
I know.
So, and the point I'm really making that we make a mistake to think it has just happened. This is a country that suffers historical amnesia. We forget. But let me tell you, grief is not something you forget. Trauma is not something you forget. So I want us to be able to then take it even further to the colonial era. That this is a country called Uganda, birthed in dominance of a particular group over others and violence. Dominance enforced through violence. The beginning of the story, of course, is the colonial times, is the British, you know, who dominated, exploited, plundered with arms. And what did they do? They co-opt a particular group of Ugandans into this project. You can actually say that that way of constructing Uganda, the country, the state called Uganda, unfortunately is the continuing story of Uganda. So we can go through epochs. And all I'm really simply saying is that we make a mistake. And I think this history is important. So, and the point I was getting to you is that because in the history of this country, the problem is not tribes or ethnic groups. The problem is that power has been distributed along ethnic lines, and especially military power. So the people who wielded the force of arms, so I was referencing to you the independence period, and we can speak about those cycles. So it is important to realize that this is not just now, there is a history to it.
Okay, I understand, and I want to agree with you that we have a violent history. We have a tumultuous past. We've gone through ugly episodes as a country. But then we're supposed to, you know, get out from something like this. I come from Toro, Dr. Zac. If I make a mistake, you do not have to attack Odeba Toro. Just look at me as Patrick, who has offended you. Leave those people alone. If there's a problem with an individual from Angola or from Kisoro, I shouldn't be attacking the Bafumbira. I should look at Dr. Zac Niringiye. What is this? Because there is no ethnic group that has a monopoly of good or bad. So for example, Joseph Kony was a bad man. He was a killer. But in the same community, we have a Janan Luwumu who was a peacemaker. You can never lump the people together that they are bad. So did you see that video? I'm sure you didn't. I did not complete that video. Somebody sent it to me. A man who's uttering words against the people in Uganda. How can you say such words? Even got an accent of undressing yourself, almost like the devil incarnate.
So the point I'm making to you is this, that first of all, narrative. It's a false narrative to suggest that our problem is ethnic, that our problem are our different ethnic
It
groups.
has not been always the case,
no.
but it appears in the last couple of days as if it is taking that dimension.
Even then, it is to misname it. That's not our problem. And I can say this to you, that the way political power that is violent or dominant constructs, social constructs that are violent, they are grounded in narratives of fear, guilt, and shame. That is how a people who seek to dominate, the beginning of violating and dominating others begins with instilling fear, with creating guilt and shame. And the point I'm making to you is that the challenge is not ethnicity. There are no ethnic groups. And by the way, the word tribe is not very helpful. It's not a very helpful categorization, because the idea tribe itself is a social construct created by the colonialists. I mean, there was never a tribe called Banyankole, by the way. There was never a tribe called... these tribes were created as a way to control. And that way of controlling, part of it is by creating the fear of the other. So divide and rule, you know, and say remember, I mean, we can even talk about the language of Banyoro in the mind of, if a Muganda was going to say something about, again, created, by the way, it's not because Baganda thought Banyoro were horrible people, but it's a construct created in the imagination of a particular group of people in order to control others. The point I'm really making, and we need to understand this, is that the challenge is the way in which political power is constructed. It's that the wielding of political power in this country has been along ethnic lines. So that's the point I was making to you, that if you understand the history of, for example, the military, and scholars have written about this. There are scholars on the history of the military, and we can't ignore militarism in this country and the alignment of the military along ethnic lines. And that itself is a construct we must question. So, as I was saying, in the initial period, it's the Acholi and the Langi. So what happens when there is violence, when that regime is overthrown? What happens? The unbelievable bloodshed in Acholi and Lango. I can tell you, visiting Acholi and Lango in the 1980s, you could hardly find adult men in Acholi and Lango because the Idi Amin regime. So let's go fast forward. The Idi Amin regime, the bulk of the people who are military generals, who run the army, who are in charge of the security and the forces, come from, again, one particular region. You know, one particular... Now, that's West Nile. There are, of course, other people Absolutely. In fact, you can even talk about those who are in the intelligence. So when the Idi Amin regime is overthrown, what happens? There is the untold scars of Ombachi, by the way, of West Nile, the demobilization of, and again it's because guns attract other guns. So the Idi Amin regime is overthrown in a so-called liberation. And in this country, there is language we must change. How do a group of Ugandans liberate Ugandans from another group of Ugandans? We've misnamed each other. As soon as I call myself a liberator and I call you Adui, the enemy, the oppressor, how do we find a way in which we are all one people, a people?
In fact, this is a country, Dr. Zac, that medals of heroism have been given to individuals who actually have excelled in killing fellow Ugandans.
So this is the point, and I'm simply saying this. Let's not just talk about what's been happening over the last few years, over the last 3 decades. It's sadly a history we have not addressed. Fast forward, we can talk about the Luwero scars, Luwero. We can talk about the Teso scars. We can talk about, I mean, this is a country of many scars. And one of the problems of this country, and I think it's Senior Counsel David Mpanga, who spoke about the fact that we do not share each other's pain, so we cannot be one nation. Truth be told, we are not yet one nation. Why? We are totally, completely divided. We do not have a common good as a people. And psychologists speak about grief and trauma, how an individual, a people, a collective respond to grief, to trauma. Let me come to this.
Yes, some of the things you're talking about the episodes of violence we've gone through in the 60s, in the 70s. We have young people today who are maybe 20 or younger, the millennials, who are on Twitter, on social media. They have no idea. They have not lived the experience of the past. For the last 35 years or so, Uganda has relatively been peaceful. But the venom that is on social media, my friend Godba calls them the social media mujahideen, the venom that is being exchanged by the people who actually do not even share that history.